Now, come back together again, and we'll move into a time of questions. Okay, so I was just talking to someone out the back there, and they said the harder the question, the better the answer. So who is going to kick off with our first question from the second session? Tom, is it? Roy, excuse me. Would someone pass that back to Roy, please?
Thank you. In all our conversations today, justice has been about basically charitable works. Shouldn't the church have a prophetic role in asking the big question? Instead of helping to feed the poor, why are they poor? And by facing up to that, deciding, is there anything we can do about changing economic structures? That's it, basically.
We're doing all right there. Can you switch with you? I think we're out of time, aren't we? Should we pray? Yeah. Well, I sure hope that we're talking about the structures of inequity and how to correct them. I mean, I feel like, the fact that CEOs are making 400 times their workers is getting at that, how to correct it. I think that's why you're here, I think. We really talk about justice maybe expressing itself in a few different ways. And you alluded to that a little bit, that I think that, the old saying, give someone a fish and they'll eat for a day, teach them to fish and they'll eat for their life, are part of the equation. Another part of the equation is asking who owns the pond, and how did the pond get polluted, and why does a fishing license cost so stinking much, and all that. Because, frankly, in our neighborhood, but I think all of those are important. I think that love does express itself in sharing, things and making sure that folks who are hungry have food. It also asks questions about empowerment and skill sharing and education and all the things that equip people to work. But I know a lot of people in my neighborhood know how to work. They have fishing rods. They just can't get to the pond. There aren't jobs available. And so I think asking really some of the fundamental questions about, we're doing that in our own context, but how do you live in a neighborhood that was built around factories that moved out? And so now people are seen as lazy or whatever other stereotypes people have, and really the rug's just ripped out from under them. So it's no surprise that the number one source of our income in our neighborhood is public assistance, and the second is the drug economy, because it's a replacement economy, And so we have a recovery community with 50 people in the recovery community, but on the wall it says, we cannot fully recover until we help the world that made us sick recover. And so they do a whole politics and economy of drug tour through Philly, talking about the social, the economic dimensions of the drug economy. So I think all that's a part of it. And there's lots of other factors, I think, in my own context that don't equate here, like the fact that our government spends $20,000 a second on military spending. And it's impossible to solve some of the other problems, like a bankrupt school system and health care, while, we're spending over $1 million a minute in the military economy, more than the next 20 countries combined. So that's our context. So we're working on some of that macro stuff. But I think each context is a little different. From my limited view of life in the UK, I think one of the things that I see here and alluded to earlier is that there's a real epidemic of loneliness, and you have some fairly good social infrastructures, but you can have good housing and not have a home. You can have good health care and not have somebody holding your hand. So I think that's one of the other things, that it can feel like the church is a little impotent in all of that, if the government's doing pretty good or whatever, but nothing can replace the fundamental longing for love and community. And I think that's what we're called to do, no matter how good or bad our systems are. But I think the question of inequity and the systems and structures that are creating that is one of the most urgent, ethical issues of our time. So yeah, I don't know how to. I can. One of the things that we did, you might get a kick out of, is we said we need to speak. We need to be prophetic witnesses about the economic structures. So we actually did a Jubilee on Wall Street where we invited all the homeless folks to Wall Street, and we gave $10,000 away in the front of the stock exchange. We had an 80-year-old nun blow a shofar, a ram's horn. Then we dropped, $10,000 from different places, and it was beautiful. Like the street sweeper came by, and he had a dustpan full of money, and he goes, "It's a good day at work," And another homeless guy got the money and said he had a bunch of money in his hand. And he said, "Thank you. Now I can get the prescription that I needed for my illness." And so I think it was a stunt, but it was also meant to raise those questions. I mean, there was a reason we did it in front of the stock exchange, and we ended up. I went to jail and for parading without a permit, but I was able to have a conversation with the police, and I left them $1 in the jail cell. But anyway, but as I was doing it, that's exactly what we were asking, were the questions about why the super rich are getting more rich and the super poor are getting more poor.
Great, thanks, Sean.
I just wanted to try to continue that conversation because I think it's going a good way. I don't know if John Fung is still in the room and able to come back up, because I think that tension between those, what John spoke of and what you spoke of is the place where there's an awful lot of work to be done. And some of it is to be done within the church congregation setting, because the executives and the people who work in the large global corporations, at least some of them are sitting in our church pews Sunday after Sunday, and they are probably going to do more to bring about change in the long term than the prophets who are, in a sense, outside on the streets speaking to the people as they're going into their offices. I mean, I think there's a place for both, and I think both are really important. But it seems to me that we haven't done enough work, imaginative work, on what we say to empower people who seek to be Jesus followers Monday to Friday in their workplace, to bring something of the reality of the kingdom into that. And I wonder how we move those two things closer together, or how we continue to work in that tension. I think that probably wasn't a question, so I apologize for that. But it's a big question. I'm saying that is the big question, I think.
Well, and it is a little unfair for John not to have the mic too. And I'm sure there's a lot of really great ideas. But I love your question, and I think putting it in the place that everybody has responsibility, no matter whether we're in the king's courts or not. I think Daniel is a great example. He was in the royal courts, but he didn't drink the royal Kool-Aid. He fasted from the food. He protected that peculiarity of his identity, and I think in some ways that's the role of discipleship, is to equip us to orient our lives around Jesus, which means we hold our possessions differently, we think of violence differently, all these things. So then no matter where we are, we're asking questions that are bouncing off of Jesus. We cap our salaries off at what so it doesn't matter what anyone makes. We pull money together, and everybody has the things that they need. But that's what John Wesley did. That's what a lot of folks in history have done. Rich Mullins, great singer and songwriter, he did that. So in the end, it doesn't matter how much money we generate. We're trying to live off of a similar income of this day, our daily bread. And Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, we've done some stuff together and had a good time. But he was asked a question once. Somebody said, "Is it a sin to get rich?" He had a pretty good answer. He said, "It's not always a sin to get rich. Sometimes you write a book, sells 1 million copies, and you have a bunch of money." He said, "But it's always a sin to die rich." And I thought that was really powerful. Is the thought that no matter how much money we're generating, the goal is to try to give it away because we're serving God, not the money, and to do that responsibly, not just within a charity model, but by, creating microloans and all kinds of ways that we can be a part of repairing that broken system. Yeah, so I think that's a few thoughts on that. But, maybe we could suggest creative ideas. Like I was at the National Pastors Association, suggested maybe we could swap salaries, from senior pastors and housekeeping staff. That went over like a pile of rocks, but yeah.
It wouldn't really work when your Church of Ireland priests over here don't get paid that much, so it probably wouldn't work that well this side of the world. But
well, it's different in our context,
Yeah,
Great line by Kierkegaard. He said it's one thing to die on a cross preaching the gospel. It says sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and another thing to make $70,000 talking about that guy.
Very good. Yeah. So we're going to move on with our next speaker, just looking at one of these creative ways that we're actually engaging this area of justice. But James has one question. Did you have your hand up there? Yeah, James, would you just maybe close out with one final question? And let's pass this mic back really quickly to James.
Hi, how's it going? You've talked about the systemic issues there just in some of the other questions that we might have to look at broad social policy. And I'm wondering, as Christians try to engage with those issues, do you ever think there's a space or an appropriate time for Christians to move into the political sphere when doing that? Or is that something that they should always say at a remove of or sort of withdrawn from to some extent?
I think Christians should be in every sphere imaginable as long as we're willing to get fired at any time. But the call is still fundamentally not to conform to the patterns of this world, but to be transformed, to have that imagination. And so I think in the business sector, that may mean that we are doing business differently. I sure hope it does. I think in the political sector, sector of society, it would make you a really bad commander-in-chief of the United States, So I think that fundamental allegiance to Jesus is what we don't compromise. But then I think we should be invading every aspect of society and keeping that sense of a holy counterculture and a different identity in Christ. So thanks for a great conversation, and look forward to more of it.